Hey guys, I'm here to read this part 2 of the simple and complex machines. So we're going to start off with wedges and screws. Now, again, I might not get through all of this. It's a pretty long story, or not story. It's nonfiction text, but it is in a booklet form. So I'm going to read about wedges. I love reading these little parts where it says, "Did you know?" They're always really fun. It's kind of like fun facts. It says, over 3,000 years ago, the Egyptians used inclined planes to build pyramids. They used long ramps to move more heavy stones uphill. And that makes sense because the pyramids are shaped like this, and that's an inclined plane. Okay. A wedge is really just two inclined planes that meet. Let's see if I can read it like this. A wedge helps you push things apart. The blade of a knife is a wedge. Your front teeth are also wedges. Wedges cut through things by moving them apart. The narrower the wedge, the easier it is to move things apart. So then I have a picture of a wedge, of an example of how a wedge works. It's going between the wood. And then it has a caption. A wedge can split a piece of wood. All right, and the next part is about screws. A screw, I'm going to look up here first because I always like to read what it says up here. So up here it says, an inclined plane wrapped around a screw, or wrapped around the center of a screw. As the screw turns, it moves it into the object. So we all have seen a screw before. It's a ramp that keeps circling around. It's an inclined plane that keeps circling higher and higher until it drills into something. So a screw is an inclined plane wrapped around a rod. The thread on a screw is the inclined plane. As you turn a screw, the thread forces the screw into wood or metal. Screws usually hold two things together, such as two pieces of wood. They can also move things by pushing them alongside the thread. Screws hold things together. So like there's screws on the side of this. This is the side of like a fence or a gate where the door opens. Okay. This page is about levers. A lever is a machine that can move heavy things. A lever often has two parts. One part is a board or a bar. The board rests on a point called the fulcrum. So we've talked about that before. This is the fulcrum, and then this is the board. The board pivots or turns on the fulcrum. If you want to use a lever to lift something, place the thing on one part of the lever, then push on the other part of the lever. If you've ever been on a seesaw, you've used a lever. On a seesaw, you can balance with someone much heavier than you. You sit far from the fulcrum, and the heavier person sits closer to the fulcrum. So if you're looking at this picture right here, and have you ever been on a slide or on a seesaw and the person who's heavier makes you go way up? Well, in this case, they have two people who are weighing out this person and making it a lot easier. Over here, they're showing you when the fulcrum is close to an object, the object can be lifted more easily, but not as high. So now you see how when the rock is over here closer to the fulcrum, he's able to lift it a lot easier, but it's not going very high. Now, if he has it with the fulcrum far away from the object is harder to lift, but it can be lifted higher. So you see this, it's kind of like if you're over on this part of the seesaw, you're not going to go as high as if you're on this part of the seesaw because the weight distribution is different. Okay. So, all right, a fulcrum can be put anywhere along a lever, not just in the center. Changing where the fulcrum is can make your job easier. The closer the object is to the fulcrum, the easier it is to move. The farther the force is from the fulcrum, the easier it is to move the object. In the diagram above, the top lever requires half as much force as the bottom one does. So they're saying that this doesn't require, that's why the arrow's smaller, because it's not as hard. But this one is going to make that rock fling up, whereas this one might make it just kind of go a little bit, because we know that this person is way heavier than a rock. So either way, this is going to be lifted. There are several ways to set up a lever. The fulcrum can be between the force and the object, as in a seesaw, or the object can be between the force and the fulcrum. A wheelbarrow is an example. The force can also be between the fulcrum and the object. So if you look at these pictures, it's showing you that's a seesaw, that's like a first class lever. And then a second class lever, they're moving the fulcrum and the object on a lever can help you do different things. So now the fulcrum is down here and the force is over here, but the lever is still right here. It's just put in a different spot, okay? And then over here, third class, the fulcrum is so they're saying that the fulcrum is his arm and the lever is the fulcrum is his shoulder and the lever is his arm. That's an interesting way. I never really thought about it like that. Wheel and axle. We're on to another simple machine. A wheel and axle is another simple machine. It is made of a wheel that is attached to a rod-like axle. When the wheel turns, the axle also turns. The wheel is wider than the axle. When the force turns the wheel, the force transfers to the axle. The wheel turns a greater distance with less force. The axle turns a lesser distance with more force. So it can move heavy objects. A doorknob is a wheel and an axle. It makes opening and closing a door easier. Wheels and axles are also used in cars and bicycles. I never really thought about this being an example because the wheel is inside here. It's the thing that's turning. And then the axle is the thing that's holding it. Or the axle would be the key, or how you change it from lock to unlock. A wheel turns farther than the axle, but with less force. And we've already known this as an example. Wheels reduce the amount of friction between things. Friction is a force that happens whenever two surfaces rub against each other. It makes it harder to move an object. The more surface that rubs between objects, the more friction there is. The more friction there is, the harder it is to move the object past each other. A wheel only has one small part touching the ground at any time, causing friction. Without wheels, there would be a lot more friction between a wagon and the ground. So that would be like trying to build a car without wheels. Then is it going to be able to move easy? No, because there's going to be a lot more friction. There's going to be a lot more rubbing together. Friction is like this. When you rub your hands together, you can create friction, which is like warmth. But also, there's not a lot of room between my hands. So that's why they're getting warm. If there was not a lot of room between this car and the ground, it would get super warm really quickly and it would burn out. And it wouldn't work anyways because there's no wheels. For every time the large gear turns, the small gear turns more than once. The large gear has more force, while the small gears move faster. And they're going to talk about gears too, which isn't one that we technically said as a simple machine, but it's still important to know. Before I do that, I'm going to read the little did you know. Did you know the oldest wheel ever found was discovered by archaeologists in Slovenia? It is believed to be over 5,100 years old. Wow. The oldest wheel. It doesn't look like it really turns much anymore, does it? Over here, a gear is really just a wheel with teeth. Gears transfer force from one place to another. Gears are attached to axles. They can increase or decrease an object's speed or change the amount of force needed to move it. A large gear will turn more slowly than a small gear it is connected to, but the large gear will turn with more force. So this is kind of a hard thing to explain. I think it would be a lot easier if you saw this in a video, which is why you should check out those videos I sent on YouTube. All right, a pulley. A pulley combines a wheel and a rope. The rope changes the direction of a force. Look at the diagram. Pulling down on the rope that is part of a pulley makes hay rise on the other end. Pulling down on the rope makes the hay rise. So he has a rope, he chained it up here, he put the pulley in there, and now he's pulling it up, making it easier to pick this up and put it over there. Okay. Pulleys can also be used to decrease the amount of force needed to move something. If you put 2 or more pulleys together, the rope will move farther. Now it will take less force to move it. But remember the trade-off. Adding pulleys to reduce force means that you have to pull the rope further to lift the load. If you add enough pulleys to reduce the force by 4 times, you must pull the rope 4 times farther. And here's an example up here. This is a pulley. This is one pulley and the chain and the object. But over here, they have a picture of 2 pulleys. And a group of 2 or more pulleys is called a block and tackle. The rope moves farther, but it takes less force to lift the load. A pulley changes the direction of the force. Pulling down raises the load. And this is a simple machine summary. So, if you want, you can quiz yourself by saying, okay, what's this one called? It's a ramp, and that's an inclined plane. Okay? And then look at all these different ones. This looks like a triangle, but I know if I had to push it into something, we call that a wedge. A screw, a pulley, gear, wheel and axle, and lever. So try to see if you can quiz yourself on knowing all of these. And then the last page of your booklet is called Complex Machines. Many machines combine several simple machines. For example, a wheelbarrow is a lever with a wheel and axle. A bicycle has wheels and axles, pulleys, and gears. A can opener uses a wedge, a lever, and a gear. Complex machines make difficult or dangerous tasks easier. Electric mixers mix batter over and over. Cranes help us build buildings. Robots build cars and dig through rubble. Each of these machines combine simple machines to make work easier. So here's an example. I bet you guys have seen these before when crossing the water. All the different cranes and machines to help build the boats. This one's for a building, but you've seen it in other areas. Machines do things that people can't. That's why we send robots to explore space and into deepest parts of the ocean. Robots like this one might explore the seas on Jupiter's moon, Europa. Conclusion. What's a conclusion? Means the end. How are you wrapping everything up? We use many machines to help us do work. Machines can be simple, just with one or a few parts. Simple machines include the inclined plane, the wedge, the screw, lever, wheel, and axle, gear, and pulley. So they're talking about 7. We didn't talk about the gear, but it's definitely important. Complex machines combine simple machines. Combine means put together. Many machines help us do tasks that are difficult, boring, or dangerous. All machines help us do work, either by using less force or over more distance or more force over less distance. What machines have you used today? All right, that's the end of this. I've read the whole story, so answering this question should be pretty easy, and I hope you learned more about simple machines and complex. Have a great day, guys. Bye.